Hello, distinguished panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our panel 2. The topic of today's discussion is what is next for US-China people-to-people exchange. We know people-to-people exchange is one of the most important pillars of the US-China relationship. As the globalization continues to advance, the people of China and the United States were increasingly connected before pandemic. China is the #1 source of international students in US. The number of Chinese students studying in the US reached 370,000 before pandemic the year. China visitors to US reached 3 million per year before the pandemic. Americans are also one of the major groups of foreign visitors and students in China. A wide variety of academic, artistic, and business exchange were also held annually between US and China, and the civil and official exchanges were very frequent before pandemic. Unfortunately, over the past 3 years, due to the pandemic and the Sino-US geopolitical tensions, people-to-people exchange between the two countries have suffered a lot, as we call it a cold snap, with the number of the flights between two countries plummeting, the number of students, the people traveling between the two countries dropping dramatically, and the perception of the two countries people talk to each other countries falling to a very, very low point, unfortunately. Actually, last panel just concluded, we mentioned about the President Biden and President Xi's meeting in November this year. This is the first time for them as a face-to-face dialogue. It's very positive signal to our bilateral relationship. Actually, CCG as a think tank, we went to US and the European countries and Asian other countries for our second track dialogue in the past few months twice. We think this is a very important people-to-people exchange. We met some of our panelists today as well in different countries. Welcome all of you. And I think this is a very critical moment to talk about today's topic. We would like to mention that recently there were a few warming up signal in people-to-people exchange between our two countries, such as the visit of Craig Allen, visit of Scott Kennedy, of course, President Danny Simon, our panelist, is also visited China. A lot of business guys would like to eager to revisit China when the situation improved. These days, we will find that on the streets in Beijing, few people, you know why? Most of the people are fighting against the new virus at home, but with a very strong eager to go outside to revive their normalized life. I think it's a good, this is winter, but like Shelley said, it always inspires us. There's a poem said that this is winter arrives, spring is not far away. And so this panel now is fostered to conversation between the leading advocates in China and the US on prospects for students and talent mobility in the context of China's reopening in 2023. Q1 2023, we will see the inauguration of the new Congress in both Washington and Beijing, with the US midterm election and China's Party Congress behind. Time may be ripe for such a substantive cross-Pacific dialogue within think tanks, nonprofits, and the universities on this issue. The panel seeks to address some issues. First one is that in the 3 years of China's COVID isolation, what's the impact on US-China students' flows? Secondly, is the Bali turning point, we mentioned President Biden, the President Xi's face-to-face dialogue is a turning point for our bilateral relationship. And China right now is going to open the border. The COVID exit is happening. What will 2023 hold for students, scholars, media, talents across the Pacific? Of course, the final one is the people-to-people exchange as a pillar in the U.S.-China relation, past and versus future. Allow me to introduce today's distinguished guests. First one is Peggy Blumenthal. Mrs. Peggy Blumenthal is a senior counselor to the President Institute of International Education. It's a well-known institution on international education, IIE. And second panelist is Daxian Feng, Honorary President of Hainan University Belt and Road Research Institute, former Vice President for Research, the University of Texas at Dallas. Welcome. And third panelist is David Fleischler, President of Association of International Education Administrators, also the Vice Provost for International Affairs, Case Western Reserve University. Welcome. Another distinguished panelist is Governor Bob Holden. Mr. Bob Holden is a chairman and president, U.S. Heartland China Association. Another panelist, Mr. David Kim. He is the senior director for leadership and exchange programs, the Asian Foundation. Mr. Dennis Simon is a senior advisor to the president for China Affairs and Duke University, also a very senior educator. Last but not least is Mrs. Madeleine Rose, president of U.S.-China Education Trust. Welcome all of you. So our first round is invite everybody to introduce your opening remark in 5 minutes, and then we can conduct the second round discussion. According to alphabetic order, we would like to invite Mrs. Peggy Blumenthal. Welcome your opening remark, Peggy.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to join this very distinguished panel of experts. I did prepare a few slides that I'm hoping you can display at this point, because I'm going to briefly summarize what we've learned from the annual survey that the Institute of International Education does every year for called Open Doors. And in this Open Doors survey, we survey over 3,000 US colleges and universities and find out how many international students they have, from what countries, and go back to the first one, please. Back to the original one.
Go back, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, stay here for a little bit if you would. So we survey the number of international students in the US at the tertiary level, and a number of Americans studying abroad for credit back home at their home institution. This first slide is really just to show you the trend data, and I'm sure all of you know that the number of Chinese students in the United States grew very dramatically over the past decade, past 2 decades, I should say. And really, it took off after 2010, 2011, with more undergraduate students from China coming, and that really started driving the numbers up. Still many, many graduate students from China, but also very large numbers of undergraduates, and indeed they exceeded the number of graduate students in recent years. With the arrival of COVID, you're going to see the numbers go down, and I'm going to look at each individual one later. But I wanted this slide to show you the big gap between the number of Chinese students in the United States and the number of Americans studying in China. It's been a huge gap ever since the beginning, and we really got worse, of course, during COVID. So the next slide, please. And this is just the US students studying in China, starting in the year 2000. It had its ups and downs, but even at its height, it was less than 15,000 American students in China. And it started declining well before COVID, actually. The numbers have been going down for the past, I would say for the past 6-7 years for various reasons. But with COVID, of course, and the closing of borders, the numbers fell off the cliff, and barely 382,000 students were in China in 2020-21. We have not yet got the data for 21-22 because we wait until the student goes home and gets credit for the work done. Please go to the next slide. This shows the number of students in China and the United States, which also fell off a cliff, but not nearly as steep a cliff with COVID. There were still, in this past academic year, over 290,000 Chinese students enrolled in US campuses. Some of them were studying remotely at home, but many of them remained in the United States and continued their education here, mostly online. The curious thing that's happening now, maybe not curious, but noticeable, is that undergraduate students are, their percentage is dropping, and graduate students are becoming, again, the more prominent numbers. So next slide, please. And Chinese students still remain by far the largest number of international students on US campuses. As you can see, while they did go down 9% from the year 2020 to the year 2021-22, they still are far ahead of the second largest sender, which is India, but numbers from India increased by 19% this past year. And then the following 4 countries, for the following number, senders, top senders, also some went up, some went down. The final slide, the next slide, please. So this, I'm just going to leave this on the screen. This is where my data comes from, and I'm hoping during the
Hello, Peggy. Can you open the microphone? We couldn't hear you.
Sorry, yeah, I just by accident hit the mute button. So yeah. I'm hoping that you can, during the discussion period, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about some of the reasons. And I know that my fellow panelists will also be able to share what's happening on individual campuses. But I just wanted to give a brief overview of sort of what the trends have been. And I will finally just close by saying we did do a flash survey, a much smaller survey this fall. And the good news was that the number of international students in the United States does continue to go up. So that's good news. But it still has a long way to go in terms of getting back to where we were. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Opinions from Peggy. You did a very great opening remark for us. Actually, CCG has been closely following IIE's research and your research. We published a series of blogs on the development students study overseas, and especially those foreign students studying China and their career development. From your slides, we find that there's a big gap between the different countries' curves, and there's students studying in US is dramatically exceeds than those students studying in China. So how to bridge the gap, how to do, what's the next? We would like to hear more from the another round discussion or the other panelists. Okay, let's move to another distinguished guest, Dr. Daxuan Feng. He's honorary president of the Hainan University BRI Institute and the former vice president for research, the University of Texas at Dallas. I know Dr. Daxuan Feng is a very, very senior educator, and he right now is an honorary professor of 15 Chinese universities, which include Peking Union Medical College, Fudan University, a lot of them. So he is with a very rich experience on higher education, global circle, and also is also senior expert on Chinese issues. So I would like to listen your opinions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mabel. Let me begin by thanking Henry and Dr. Ann Tang for organizing this very timely forum. By the way, this is the first time on a panel that one of my panelists is the governor or a former governor of a state. That is going to go on my resume from now on. I think it is almost a cliche now to say that in the 21st century, one of the most critical geopolitics is the relationship between two of the economically most powerful nations in the world, the United States and China. In this regard, people-to-people exchange, or now more and more the lack of it, is critical for the future, not for just these two countries, but for humanity in the 21st century. Since my family had and has benefited by such exchanges, it is only fair that I should concentrate my short comments on this aspect. By the way, my father completed his JD from NYU. My mother was one of the first piano students at the Juilliard. My sister, brother, and I all received our tertiary education and built our careers in the States. It is only natural that I would want to do everything within my power, small as it may be, to promote a better relationship between United States and East Asia in general, China in particular. One of the best people-to-people exchanges is intellectual collaborations. Yet, the current situation between the United States and China is anything but good. As far as intellectual collaborations are concerned, the situation appears to be dire. Indeed, what happened to numerous academics, such as Xing Xiaoxing of Temple University, Chen Gang of MIT, Franklin Tao of Kansas University, Hu Anming of the University of Tennessee, Sherry Chen of the United States National Weather Service, and last but not least, Charles Lieber of Harvard, to name just a few, have no doubt created a profound, fearful atmosphere all across the board among the academics in the United States for collaboration with counterparts in China. It is interesting that many of these above-mentioned scientists or intellects were essentially caught in some form of legal entanglements. At this moment, there appears to be no way that the institutions that they belong to can a priori prevent their legal actions from happening. Unless the United States and China truly intend to decouple scientific collaborations altogether, it seems to us that one must find a solution to this rather specific problem. And in my mind, as the former vice president for research, the solution has to originate at the institutions. Roughly 3 years ago, my colleague Stephen Pei of the University of Houston and I, leveraging our university administrative experiences, made a direct proposal to do just that. I should say that one of my former presidents once told me, don't tell me just a problem, give me a solution too. Otherwise, don't tell me the problem. So I want to give you a possible solution here. We suggested straightforwardly that whenever a faculty in the university intends to establish an intellectual relationship, whatever that relation may be, with a faculty of a foreign university, then the vice president of research of both universities at the United States and foreign collaborate on such a thing that the collaborative work must be clearly specified. The intellectual properties which arise from the collaboration be clearly defined as to who owns it, and that the faculty cannot and must not in a year receive 2 salaries on any given day. Finally, at the end of each academic year, there must be a full report submitted to the offices of both vice presidents of research. We feel that having such a transparent paper trail of this agreement can eliminate many unnecessary legal ambiguities and morasses. Now, Presidents Biden and Xi had met in Bali at the G20 meeting, and that the leadership of both countries seem to want to be reconnected. I hope that is true. It seems like this may be a good time to go after the lowest hanging fruits, which is to aggressively begin and encourage intellectual collaborations again. However, to do that, one must eliminate the current prevailing very, very toxic atmosphere, which seems to me is the very first step in this direction. Thank you, and I look forward to discussions with everyone.
Thank you, President Feng. You propose great solutions, especially for the intellectual cooperation between US and China. I love your saying that give us the solutions, not just give the problems. So thank you. Let's move to another very distinguished guest and a panelist. He is Mr. David Fleischler, the president of Association of International Education Administrators, AIEA. He is also the vice provost for international affairs, Case Western Reserve University. Mr. Fleischler is a very senior educator, and he also served as a lot of organizations on international education. He used to be the chair of a policy advisory board of American Management Association. He is also the president of the Association of International Education Administrators. I guess there's a lot of education administrators in this association. You are the very distinguished representative of the International Education Administrator. Thank you for your opinions. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I was just trying to unmute. Well, first of all, thank you to both Henry, Dr. Tang, and the Center for China and Globalization, both for inviting me and for putting on this very timely, very interesting session. To pick up where our last speaker left off with the question of the toxic time that we're in, I am not hopeful that in the short term we're about to exit the kind of tensions that we see in the United States and in China. And so therefore, I think we need to look at the underlying question of how do we continue the relationships during the current period. As you introduced me, I'm probably the only senior international officer actually sitting on a college campus. I sit at Case Western Reserve University, in addition to my national role at the Association of International Education Administrators. So I want to start off by following up on some of Peggy's slides, on some of her information, and try to distinguish a little bit between and among institutions, because not all institutions are the same. While we see that there are fewer Chinese students in the United States, and that's dropped fairly considerably, we also see that at major institutions that we would call R1, Research 1 universities in the US, those are places like Duke, where my distinguished friend, Dr. Simon is, Harvard, NYU, University of Southern California, Michigan, and indeed Case Western Reserve University. We see the number of Chinese students is continuing, and in many cases, it's actually growing. And in the slides that Peggy presented, you also saw that the number of graduate students it actually exceeds the number of undergraduate students, and those students are coming to the R1 research universities. International students, perhaps in general, but certainly Chinese students, the numbers are dropping at the non-flagship state universities, lower ranked universities, and indeed undergraduate students. So the implication of that, it seems to me, is twofold. One is that many top students who are self-pay students, so that would be primarily undergraduate students and master's students, still believe that U.S. education is valuable. And they're coming to these R1 institutions. These, I would think, are students who are interested in working internationally or are interested in working outside of China and see that the U.S. education continues to be valuable. The second type of student that's coming are really top graduate students, those who are coming to get PhDs primarily. The US still wants those students, and I believe that China still wants to send those students here, and that they can come with funds from the government, from the China Scholarship Council. They, I believe, sort of undergird both the academic and the research enterprise, certainly at our universities here in the United States. Again, some of the numbers that Peggy presented, primarily those are science and engineering students. And I believe that both countries still want those students, perhaps for different reasons, but want those students. So even in this era of tension that we see, we still see top students coming to the U.S. So let me shift for 1 second and look at the positives for Chinese students still coming to U.S. campuses. And before this, in preparation for this, I talked with some of our student affairs people, both at Case Western Reserve and in different universities throughout the country. And a couple of thoughts here. One is that the overall experience for Chinese students continues to be good on campuses in the U.S. The universities in the U.S. Try to integrate Chinese students, make them part of campus life. We see them leading organizations, participating, et cetera. They're still able to work in labs, although there clearly are issues with research in certain areas that are sensitive, and I'll discuss that in 1 second. And of course, they come so that they can both understand and appreciate life in the U.S., network with the idea that they may be able to stay here for some period of time and get a real experience, not only as a student, but also after they graduate. And I think that leads me into my next point, which is that at least some policymakers in the United States, and I'd be interested in thoughts from other panelists on this, are recognizing the importance of international persons, particularly students, including students from China. You know, demographics are changing in this country. Fewer people are being born. If we want to continue economic advancement in certain areas in the US, it's going to be because we have immigrants, refugees coming into the country. I live in Cleveland, Ohio, in Northeast Ohio, and it's quite clear that even in a fairly conservative state, that policymakers are recognizing the need to bring in people from outside the U.S. to create the kind of economic advancement to continue the ability of people to work. Most people on this Zoom at the session probably know OPT, optional practical training, and students can stay for 3 years if they're STEM students here, and that gives them a lot of experience. And I think Chinese students are taking advantage of that. Finally, I don't think we can end this session without talking about the negatives for Chinese students. We clearly see an anti-Asia, anti-China sentiment among some of the population in the US. As the prior speaker talked about, there are clear political tensions, and we're hearing a lot about those, and on college campuses worrying about those tensions, particularly the idea of espionage, defense-related research. We hear a lot about that, and the solution that was presented before is the kind of thing that can go to rebut those issues. And finally, we have to remember that there are certainly perceptions of personal safety and gun violence in the United States. I think a lot of times those are overblown outside of the US. Most of our campuses actually are quite safe, and international students generally, Chinese students in particular, feel safe, but that's not always what gets played out in the media. So I just end by saying that unless there is really some sort of government intervention that says that students cannot travel, cannot come to the US. I believe that overall the forces that I've talked about argue in the short term, at least, for students continuing to come to the US and for the relationships to continue growing. And I look forward to the discussion at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for David's introduction. For the students studying US, there are 4 categories. You mentioned very concrete categories and their attitude to their studying US, and what's the sentiment among those students. I think they are very diversified, actually. It's not just one sphere, and how to keep them and attract them from US side, and how to change those attitude, the negative attitude right now. It's also a challenge for the US education, I think so. So next, we would like to move to another very distinguished guest, panelist. He is Governor Bob Holden. Governor Bob Holden right now is the chairman and president of U.S. Heartland China Association. We know Governor Bob Holden served as Missouri's 53rd governor. And during his term in office as governor, he chaired the Midwest Governor Association, opened Missouri's first trade office in China, and conducted a lot of those joint events, joint programs between U.S. and China. I was invited by Mr. Bob Holden, his U.S. Heartland China Association, to be a speaker on their conference on U.S.-China students flows. A few months ago, you set up this agenda very early, and would like to do a lot of contributions to the U.S.-China students flows. I remember on your conference that time, a lot of the presidents from both sides, from China, U.S., Heartland, 2 countries, those university presidents are very eager to attract the students from 2 sides to studying in the university. I think this is a trend, and the sentiments there. This is our friendship in the past 4 decades we have done. So I think how to continue that, how to call for more students flows in the future. I would like to listen to your opinion. Thank you for participating in us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mall, for your kind comments and participation earlier. That's added a tremendous amount of value to our discussion and our planning going forward. You've been a leader all across the academic world, and we very much appreciate your involvement. We had the pleasure of hearing Mr. Mall speak virtually at our Heartland Regional University event in Nashville back in August. And her insights there inspired many follow-up conversations among the attendees. As you all know, I've had a very unique experience in promoting exchanges between the United States and China, first as an elected official, then as a college professor, and now as the leader of a nonprofit organization, United States Heartland China Association. As the governor of Missouri and chairman of the Midwest Governors Association, I had opened Missouri's first trade office in China. At this time, I valued the value I valued China's students and scholars for their contributions to our state's economy as much as our growing export to China itself. I will never forget my first visit to China. My family came with me, and during the trip, my son turned 10. And we visited with school there, and they learned a lot. I learned a lot. But the important is of visiting schools and learning the culture. We were visiting these schools. The teachers asked for their students could give our son a present. And what's a father to do when somebody makes the offer? Later, when I became professor of Webster University, I had the opportunity to bring the first Confucius Institute to Missouri. And it went very well, and now it has been changed. And we've had difficulty in that issue, as they have all across the country. It's important that we figure out how we can build those relationships that really help both countries and both cultures. Those interactions are what inspired me to continue promoting exchanges between the people of the United States and China today, because I know that the people of the United States and China are there to want to learn and want to grow and prosper. So China must stay in common with all of us working together to have a better understanding of what each other's culture is all about. The panels have some of the leading experts on the U.S.-China people-to-people exchanges. So many of the organizations here have done great work, and it's been very, very beneficial to all of us. From universities to universities, it is added tremendous value to our organization and our region. From ping pong diplomacy and sister cities, the students and scholars exchanges, all of those have added real value. From the universities to multinational and small businesses, we believe all of these exchanges are excellent, but must go hand in hand to make sure we build the type of future that both cultures want. From the Heartland region, where we are often referred to as the flyover region, we see many unmet interests and needs related to China. We believe that the future of the U.S.-China people-to-people exchanges need to be expanded in the following ways. Number one, we need more inclusive exchange programs that engage diverse constituents regardless of their age, their race, their economic situation. Exchanges with China should not be a luxury. Those in rural communities should have just as much opportunity to engage internationally and develop the kind of appreciation and understanding that really adds value to both countries and both cultures. I have been involved with the American Legion Missouri Boys State program for over 40 years. My work there has enabled me to better understand how young people from different cultures can relate and learn from each other, and to create experiences for these high schoolers that teaches them about culture and appreciation by welcoming Chinese students to their conferences. This gives me hope that if we can start with young people, we will have a better chance to build a real connection and appreciation between the younger generation and our two countries. These past 3 years have been tough on all students and all citizens, our families, our businesses, both at home and abroad. But I hope that 2023, we will see the return of people-to-people exchanges. I truly believe that human interaction, one person at a time, is our best form of diplomacy, and that learning is to appreciate one another's culture and best taught ways that they learn and we learn, so that the people can develop into a strong, coherent culture moving forward. It is our duty to make this world a better place for those that come after us. And frankly, it is in our best interest to do so. We must continue the good work that got us here and learn each other's ways, so we can forge a cooperative bilateral relationship that actually bodes well for the safety and security of the entire world. We all have too much invested in that effort to turn our back and turn our lot another direction. We must find ways to work together for everyone's benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor, for your great words and great opinions on how to resume our engagement between our young people, our civil society, and different all the fields of our two society. That's quite important. People today on this panel, those distinguished panelists, actually, just now, Dr. Da Xuanfeng mentioned here, parents and a lot of well-known figures, they, with rich experience between two countries, they are the outcome of good results of the people-to-people engagement, people-to-people exchange between our two countries in the past 4 decades. So I think your voice represents the heartland of US. I think your counterparts, last time I participated in your event, it's quite impressive. I remember your counterparts, those people from Sichuan, from Shanxi, from a lot of Shanxi, those provinces in China, they still with a strong eager to conduct the engagement again. So I think it's about to return the engagement face-to-face again. Thank you very much. Next, we would like to invite another distinguished guest. He is the Mr. David Kim, Senior Director for Leadership and Exchange Program, the Asia Foundation. We know Asia Foundation is quite active in China and Asian countries for people-to-people exchange. And I know one of your distinguished programs for the young people exchanges is doing very well. I would like to invite David Kim to introduce more about that. Floor is yours, David.
Thank you very much, Mabel. And I do have some slides prepared just to have a little bit more visual presentation for this one. I am very pleased, however, to follow Governor Holden, and I am very grateful for his remarks and his sentiments. It is actually a tagline of one of our programs that we deepening relations between countries, one person at a time. I am in full support of that sentiment and that investment in people to make the world a better place. The next slide, please. Mabel, again, thank you and CCG for inviting me and on behalf of the Asia Foundation to take part in this particular panel today. I am David Kim, and I have the pleasure of directing LEADX, the Leadership and Exchange Programs for the Asia Foundation. Next slide, please. The Asia Foundation has always believed in the fundamental importance of investing in human capital and has worked for decades all across Asia to develop and influence the next generation of policy leaders in Asia who have helped change the course of development in their countries. Our work at LeadX continues to invest in tomorrow's leaders and supports an extraordinary and diverse body of young and emerging professionals. Next slide, please. The commitment to advancing leadership for Asia's future is an enduring legacy of our work in Asia. Over a 5-year period from 2018 to 2022, the Asia Foundation's LeadX team has organized and implemented exchange programs, customized workshops, and leadership trainings that have involved 669 people, representing a total of 32 different countries. Over the ever-shifting course of the pandemic, our team has reflected repeatedly, as I am sure all of you have, on what is possible, what is probable, and also what is not possible. These past 2 years have taught important and often difficult lessons on setting and managing expectations. We have all been challenged, frustrated, and often disappointed, but we've also been agile and innovative. And in this presentation, I will quickly highlight some of our work and exchange programs. Next slide, please. Starting in 2014, the Asia Foundation Development Fellows Emerging Leadership for Asia's Future program has provided talented young professionals from Asia with an invaluable opportunity to strengthen their leadership skills and to build networks of support and encouragement. Next slide, please. The pandemic forced the extension of our 2020 Development Fellows into 2021, and no matter how hard we tried, and we tried really hard, we were never able actually to meet them in person. Our 2022 Development Fellows finally met in March for a leadership training intensive, met virtually in March, and we were finally able, after quite an ordeal, to get them to the United States for programs in October. Again, if anybody wants to talk about pandemic planning and the number of testing policies and other things to try to arrange in-person programs, I'm happy to do so. Over the course of our Development Fellows programs, we are privileged to have 5 Development Fellows from China as part of the cohorts. Our next slide, please. This year, we have also been very excited to design and launch a new initiative involving a younger demographic. This is the LeadNext Fellows Ambassadors for a Global Future, involving a dynamic group of future leaders from across Asia and the United States, aged 18 to 25. The program involves 8 months of intensive leadership training and virtual master classes. Next slide, please. The inaugural cohort of 20 LeadNext Fellows represented 10 countries from across Asia Pacific and 10 cities from 6 cities in the United States, or 6 states. I'm sorry, 10 cities across 6 states in the United States. They were also able to gather in person for a capstone seminar in the San Francisco Bay Area in August, and we're very pleased that we will have now a 2023 LeadNext Fellow who will represent China. The next slide, please. The Asia Foundation has had the distinct honor of administering the Luce Scholars Program, the signature program of the Luce Foundation, since its launch in 1974. And as it has since its beginning, the Luce Scholar Program seeks to forge stronger, more informed, more compassionate relationships across borders by creating opportunities for young Americans to deepen their connection with the countries, cultures, and people of Asia. But next slide, please. Between 1985 and 2022, some 80 Luce Scholars have been able to spend their Luce Scholar year in Asia, in China. Of today's nearly 800 Luce Scholar alumni, many have gone on to demonstrate extraordinary and visionary leadership and are accomplished leaders and innovators across the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. The extraordinary challenges of the global pandemic have made Luce Scholar placements in Asia very, very challenging and awfully vastly different than what had been imagined or expected. We hope sincerely to be able to resume Luce Scholar placements in China as soon as we can. This is a really important program to help deepen very individual understanding about China and also then about the relationship between the United States and China. Next slide, please. Like all of you, the pandemic has forced us all to be innovative and to try new things. We are today on Zoom. I have been on Zoom nonstop for what seems like 3 years. We have been on Teams, Hopin, Gather, Oh Yay, Mural, WiseHive, HighBright, Canvas, all sorts of different things to try to connect, but it does not replace the strength of in-person gatherings and in-person programming. Together with our partners, we remain committed. I'm sorry, next slide, please. Since 1979, the Asia Foundation has partnered with leaders and communities in China to support development and foster aspirations for a better future. Together with our partners, we remain committed to a thriving China and to advancing shared goals and enduring cooperation within Asia and the world. Our team will work closely to support our colleagues in our Beijing office and their commitment to expanding existing and building new youth exchange programming that can advance relations and understanding between the United States and China, especially for younger generations. We welcome an opportunity, for instance, for ongoing engagement with CCG's Global Young Leaders Dialogue. Next slide, please. Since its founding, the Asia Foundation has supported over 10,000 grantees, amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars in support for leadership and exchange programming. The legacy of the Foundation's work on leadership and exchange programs has yielded an extraordinary list of grantees, both Asian and American. Across Asia, their ranks include presidents, Supreme Court justices, prime ministers, foreign ministers, university presidents, civil society leaders, and leading voices for change and development. For years, the Foundation had introduced participants from Asia to prominent programs such as the Harvard International Seminar, the Nieman Fellows Program, the APSA Congressional Fellowship Program, and the Georgetown Leadership Seminar, just to name some. Importantly, though, and this reflects a lot of Governor Holden's sentiment, these exchange programs from the beginning have provided forum for candid dialogue, the sharing of information and perspective, and especially the shaping of new friendships and understanding across borders. In many ways, measuring the impact of the Foundation's work can be best seen by the quality and the character of the individuals that we have connected with along their leadership journeys. Last slide, please. Our team is a small one, but we remain dedicated to the invaluable and transformative power of people-to-people exchange. Over the years, our goal, our commitment has remained consistent, helping extraordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. And we thank you for the opportunity to engage in this panel with CCG, and we welcome the resumption of exchanges between the United States and China. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. David Kim, for your kind introduction about those fantastic and vivid projects for young people engagement between China, between US and the rest of the world. I think that is very, very important. When I was visit US this year, after 3 years quarantine, isolation in China, there's a very strong feeling for me is that usually we always say that, oh, the trade business is the bedrock of US-China relationship. But this time I feel strongly that the people-to-people, people mobility itself, humanistic people-to-people exchange, face-to-face dialogue, that is the bedrock of our relationship. So I love your projects, and we CCG, we have done a lot of those work as well. We initiated Global Young Leaders Dialogue, which is a leading young people international community right now. We will have our annual conference this end of this year, and we would like to engage more young people from US. Actually, in the past few years, we initiated this program. Some American young people participate in our program right now. Several of them already as the scholars or researchers have the job in CCG, and most of our colleagues in CCG with the higher education background from US. So this is good news as well. That's why CCG organized such a platform and events to bridge US and China relation. I think this is also a kind of outcome of our the international education exchange. Okay, thank you, David from Asia Foundation for your introduction about young people exchange program. Next, we would like to invite Mr. Dennis Simon. He's a senior advisor to the president for China Affairs at Duke University. Dennis Simon is our CCG's old friend, and he's a very senior higher educator and expert. He won the China National Friendship Award in 2006 very early, and he was he has served as a tenured full professor at several top-tier U.S. universities. A lot of them I couldn't read the long list. And recent few years, I remember he was the executive vice chancellor of Duke Kunshan University, a very successful joint venture international university located in Kunshan, China. Of course, he's a great author as well, published a lot of books on higher education, on his own expertise. So floor is yours, Dennis.
Thank you very much. And again, my thanks to Henry and to Mabel for organizing the panel. It is very important that we keep mind of the critical role of people-to-people diplomacy in the bilateral relationship, both in science and technology and in education. The people-to-people part of that relationship has far outgrown what the government bilateral relationship even considered possible in the early years. And so, as everyone has suggested, we need not only government involvement, but we need the stakeholders from academia, from think tanks, from business involved in order to keep the relationship vibrant, alive, and hopefully growing in the years ahead. I'm going to talk about joint venture universities. Why? Because I spent 5 long years as the executive vice chancellor, and now I have I left in June of 2020. I was present on the campus when the decision was made in late January to evacuate the campus. And I've been, of course, watching at what has happened in terms of the return first of the Chinese students, then of the international faculty, and then the international students, which have unfortunately come back only in drips and drabs. But I think that if we step back for a moment and look at the idea of these joint venture universities, the first thing that we have to do is we have to give great credit to the Ministry of Education in China. In 2005, when the decision was made to inaugurate the first joint venture university, Ningbo Nottingham, involving the UK University of Nottingham. This was really a remarkable decision. Most Western educators never thought they would see the day when such a kind of new venture would be accepted in China, particularly because of some critical issues in the management of these new ventures, and of course academic freedom being one of the most important. Today there are 10 official joint venture universities in China. That means 10 institutions that give dual degrees, a foreign degree and a Chinese degree. And among those 10, 4 involve US institutions, NYU Shanghai, Duke Kunshan, Wenzhou Qin, and the latest is Juilliard, which is in Tianjin. And those are the 10. Now, there are some 2,300 joint venture projects in China, of which about 1,200 or so involve universities. And these involve things like, say, a single master's degree. So University of Michigan and Shanghai Jiao Tong University give a master's. Pittsburgh and Sichuan University have a joint degree. And of course, one of the earliest programs that was developed was the Johns Hopkins program with Nanjing University, which really was, at the frontier in those days, not only because of its structure, but more importantly, because of the topic. International relations and international affairs can involve some sensitive issues. Nonetheless, that campus has thrived. It has had some bumps along the way, as its participants will tell you, but many of the people today that serve in the U.S. Embassy in China or the Chinese Embassy in Washington actually were trained at the Hopkins campus in Nanjing. Now, what's interesting about these joint venture universities is that they have been the product of a time and a situation that as of 2022 and we're turning into 2023 may no longer be present. One of the motive drivers of this was the spread of globalization, the lowering of borders, which allowed faculty, students, a lot of mobility has been involved in making these things possible. And as we know, we're talking today about words like fractured globalization or even deglobalization. And so some of that, some of that motive force is no longer there. The same thing with campus internationalization. In the United States, I know David works with all of the senior international officers, and at many campuses, there is a hesitancy to return back to the so-called pre-COVID period because of concerns expressed by the US government. And so one wonders whether or not that motive force of internationalization will still be there. Now, on the Chinese side, that's very, very strong. Most people don't realize there are close to 500,000 international students studying at Chinese universities. That's a big number. Now, in terms of joint venture universities, the total number of students involved in these projects, the Chinese data suggests is over 300,000 international students who are involved in some kind of joint venture project. But in terms of these campuses, the largest ones are the ones involving the two UK universities, Ningbo, Nottingham, and Xi'an, Liverpool, out in Suzhou. Now, the thing that we have to remember about joint venture universities is that they're not easy to manage. They're very complex. They're very difficult. There's a number of operational issues that get involved, operational issues that have to do with the fact that the joint venture is a legal Chinese entity and that the chancellor must be a Chinese citizen. And so that puts a number of constraints in terms of bringing over through technology transfer or knowledge transfer, things like the liberal arts model of education. And Duke Kunshan, NYU Shanghai, for example, are two examples of universities that have made strong commitments to liberal arts and yet have found it increasingly difficult to continue moving forward. STEM education, no problem. But liberal arts education, particularly involving humanities and social sciences, a little bit more difficult to put in place. The Chinese side has liked the joint venture universities because they serve as a talent magnet for bringing over faculty to these institutions. DKU, for example, has faculty from 14, 15 different countries from around the world. Not that many are from within China, but many are from the United States and Europe, and they bring with them, their pedagogical methodology, which is very much, the kind of give and take in the classroom. And they ask students a question that most Chinese tell us they've never been asked. What do you think? No one has ever asked them what they think. And the pedagogical model that's been brought to DKU, NYU, et cetera, really thrives because it tries to get Chinese students in particular to think about how they make an argument, how they basically develop an opinion, and how they can marshal facts and information to make a point in a discussion without simply repeating what some professor or faculty member has told them. The operational issues that are involved are not only on the Chinese side. It's important to realize they also come from the foreign side. the home university like Duke or NYU, et cetera, there's not always a solid group of people who are in support of using campus resources to support these initiatives. The idea, of course, is that American universities, according to some people in the US Congress, are selling out their core values for a big payday. But I can assure you, these universities do not make a lot of money. In fact, it's just the opposite. Most of them run in a high deficit mode. This is elite education at its finest. And in many cases, it's a very expensive proposition to deliver this kind of education to the students. Now, in addition to the kinds of things I've talked about, of course, no one could have anticipated that it was going to be a pandemic and that the international students in particular, which in NYU's case is 50% of the student body, and DKU, it's somewhere between 35 to 40% of the student body, that they would be scattered to all corners of the earth. And in about 12 or 13 weeks after the COVID pandemic struck at the end of January, they are already engaged in online education, except for the fact with students from 41 different countries at DKU, you had tremendous problems of delivering the programs because of different internet connectivity, different time zones, different living situations, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, no one also could have envisioned in 2013, when DKU was founded, that Sino-US relations would take a turn for the worse and end up in a very sour state, as we were referred to during this panel. And the state of the relationship has affected joint venture universities in many, many different kinds of ways. And it just made it a little bit more difficult to operate. And of course, changing circumstances within China as well have also made it difficult to operate. Particularly, again, that issue of academic freedom rears its head and makes it difficult on certain occasions to proceed ahead with the pedagogical model. What everyone doesn't understand, what most people don't understand, and I think this is a really important point, is that the issue of academic freedom is not a political one. The issue of academic freedom is all about accreditation. In order for the degree to remain accredited, in order for the degree to be allowed to approved by, in our case, the Southern States Association that accredits the degree, the equivalent pedagogical environment must exist in the overseas location. And there are review teams sent periodically out to DKU, as they are for NYU and as they are for Wenzhou King, to ensure that, in fact, that the quality of the education is not Duke Light or Duke B or some, lower variation of what Duke offers back in Durham. It has to be equivalent because the students who graduate get a Duke degree. So this is all not about a political perspective. It is about an educational quality issue that comes up to help us maintain. So where is this thing going now in the future? It's going to be hard to get students back. The good news, and I think this is reflected in Peggy's data, is that the number of applicants coming from Chinese students to joint venture universities like DKU and NYU has increased substantially. Many parents like the idea of their kids getting a US style or UK education, but not having to leave the safety of their country. And I think that that accounts for the numbers going up on the Chinese side. Similarly, for international students, very surprisingly, I don't have the data for this past year, but up to last year, the numbers of international students wanting to come to DKU is also on the rise. And that was true for NYU, Ningbo and Nottingham, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, many Chinese students today at Ningbo and Nottingham, I know personally, have now decided to get their master's degree in China at places like these JV universities rather than going abroad. So that also is something that we need to consider. Let me close by just with a quote from President Vincent Price. President Price was giving a speech in China, and he said, DKU is a shining light on the hill in the midst of the turbulence of US-China relations. And that exactly describes where we are. what was once thought going to be perhaps a slam dunk, or at least not such a major challenge. I can tell you from year one, when I got there in 2015 to when I left in June of 2020, things got increasingly difficult. Nonetheless, I would argue, and I think we heard this from everyone on this panel so far, and I'm guessing we're going to hear it from Madeline as well. These kind of experimental ventures are so important because they bring the young people of both countries together in a learning environment in which they can begin to understand how each other thinks. They can understand the culture of the other country, and they can begin to work together collaboratively so that 10, 20, 30 years later in their careers, when they meet each other on the battlefield of business or foreign policy or whatever it may be, they can have a better understanding how to talk to one another, how to interact with one another, and hopefully work together. So despite, some of the challenges and the hurdles, I think that, and I hope that we will start to see more interest return in these JV universities, but it will take, again, a big push on the Chinese side and the US side to make these happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis. I totally agree with you that JV campus and JV higher education programs, campus, universities play a significant role between US-China relation. And it's also a very important pillar of our higher education cooperation and people mobility. Yes, CCG has done a lot of work for resume and revive those joint venture campus in China. We would like to promote like the Kunshan one, the Kunshan Duke, and the Ningbo Nottingham, and a lot of those cases. It's good news that a lot of the Chinese young people prefer to study in the JV campus. In the past 3 years, due to pandemic, they couldn't go abroad, but choose the joint campus in China to explore what will happen. Then I guess after the border open, more and more students will, through the JV campus, go to overseas, have continue their international studies. I hope so. And I still very optimistic that, right now in China, due to the U-turn is making, the COVID policy restriction right now is opening day by day. Right now, the trans-provincial tours is open. I guess the border will open very soon. And I think it's opportunity for JV campus in a few months. Next, last but not least, I would like to invite a very important guest. She is the Mrs. Madeline Rose, is the former Associate Director of China Studies and Executive Director of CIS China, which includes the Hopkins Nanjing Center Partnership. We know CIS it's very well known between US and China, trained a lot of distinguished scholars and officials. Madeline also was the CIS dual degree program with the Tsinghua University and the other CIS activities official. Right now, she is the president of US-China Education Trust, also very active organization between US and China. I would like to stress more about Mrs. Rose's personal background. She has worked for 30 years in China-related positions at education and nonprofit organization. I would like to stress that Madeline herself is a student. She was one of the first American students studying China following normalization of US-China relations. She was a student at Fudan University in Shanghai in 1979 to 1980, very, very early. And, just now, some panelists remind me that the memory after the pandemic, a lot of people kick off the U.S.-China second track dialogue, like Madeline and other people. Scott Kennedy just visit China, and Henry Wang, and both two sides, the delegates are the people with the other sides higher education background. So I think I would like to invite Mrs. Rose for your opinions. Thank you, Mrs. Rose.
Thank you very much, Mabel. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with so many people who have dedicated so much of their lives to people-to-people exchanges between the US and China. And thank you to, we don't have to put up the slide yet. I have one slide to share later, but let's take the slide off now. I'll tell you in a minute. But I also appreciate the fact that the China Center for Globalization has done such great work over the years to try to make the impact of globalization on China's people and on US-China exchange better known. It's something I believe in, and as you mentioned, it's been a part of my life for a long time. And the US-China Education Trust, where I work now, is dedicated to improving people-to-people understanding through educational programs and exchanges. So anyway, it's an important part of my life. The topic today is a broad one. What's next for US-China people-to-people exchange? And the topic can cover any number of things, including tourism, everything from tourism to sports to culture. But all of us have focused our discussion on students. Why is that? I think because students are the leading edge of US-China people-to-people exchange. They are spending the most amount of time in each other's society. In many cases, they are spending years and earning degrees and sometimes relocating. They are doing important work for better understanding. And when we think of student exchanges, I'd like to put forward the idea that the story of the 3 million Chinese students who have studied in America is one of the greatest success stories of the post-Mao relationship between the United States and China. It's one that I feel very strongly about. I first encountered Chinese students in 1979 when they were in my classroom at Fudan University. And as most people in this forum probably know, those students who went to college entered in 1978 were an exceptional group of people, highly motivated, encountered all kinds of diversity, and were able to pass the Gaokao. So I've had a great respect for Chinese students since that time. I've known them and their life in the United States over 40 years, through friendships, through study, through work. I believe that it's a little understood phenomenon that the Chinese students who come to America are not a uniform group. They've changed. It's a very changing, dramatic story from one decade to the next. I think Peggy Blumenthal's slides showed a little bit of the change between the first students who came to America, who were advanced graduate students, the broadening of that group to a wider number of graduate students, who not all of whom were financed by the Chinese government, but were beginning to be receive scholarships to American universities. And then gradually more and more undergraduates started coming until they totally overpowered the number of graduate students. And they also came largely on their own financial means and not through scholarships and not through government financing. So now the story is still changing. And as the slides show, more and more graduate students are coming, fewer and fewer undergraduates are coming. And the reasons they're coming and the decisions they make after they study here are also changing. So I think that it's a poorly understood but very dramatic and really important story for our country and for China, because those students now have been going back and forth from China to the United States for 40 years. And the early ones are now at the height of their careers, and they're in leadership positions in China and in the United States. And it's not uncommon to go to a university and find a senior leader in China who studied in America. And it's also not uncommon to find them at many American campuses. If you could put up my slide just for a moment, I want to take a minute just to talk about a project that the U.S.-China Education Trust is undertaking to try to better understand the changing perspectives and profile of Chinese who have come to the United States and earned degrees for the last 30 years. So if you are one of these students, or if you know a student, I hope you would take this survey and tell others about it. It's very short and simple, but it's beginning to answer the question of how has this group changed over the years, and why did they come? What did they do with their degrees? What impact did it have on their life? So thanks for putting up that slide. You can take it off. We hope you will consider taking the survey and spreading it. It's going to be the launching point for USET to do a series of programs about these students and the impact that they've had on the two different societies. A little bit more about this group. As many people before me on this panel have mentioned, this exchange has been a great success story, but it has also in recent years come under a dark cloud. And, it's hard to imagine, but members of the Trump administration and others were casting doubts in recent years on the motives of students and scholars in this country, their loyalty, and it was a dark time. And I think we are now coming out of that time, and it's been largely rejected. There's certainly certain wrongdoing that may have taken place, but it is considerably overshadowed by the incredible good that has been brought by this group of students. So as we move forward, this panel has called for us to think about what comes next. And we've all talked about our belief that these exchanges are important, they matter, students need to know each other. But I'd like to say, there's no going back. The numbers are probably not going to resume the levels that we saw in 2018 and 2019, 370,000 Chinese students in this country. And there's many reasons why the number of Chinese students is gradually going down, and not all of them reflect a negative assessment of the United States. Some of them are due to other opportunities. But it's probably a natural decline, and it's not necessarily all bad, because I think, as other people have said, many, many Chinese students are still choosing to study here. And for the overwhelming majority, they have an incredibly positive experience. At least that's what I've observed in 40 years of knowing these students in America. So overall, I am positive. I know that there's an incredible amount of goodwill on both sides among the universities in China and the United States. They want to resume exchanges. They want to resume study abroad programs. And American universities want Chinese students to know that they are valued and they are welcome. I should note that many, many American universities spoke out vociferously in support of their Chinese students during the dark days of recent years when there were suspicions being cast. So we should remember that. And one final note is that the young people in the United States and China now, Gen Z as it's called, it's very important for Gen Z to have face-to-face experiences with each other because they have been growing up in the pandemic. And while American youth seem to have a relatively positive view of China, studies show that Chinese youth may be more negative than the population overall in their view of Western countries and their view of the United States. And, some of that may reflect recent years and anti-Asian movements in the United States that they do exist. So it's more important than ever for us to make them know that they are welcome and that these are small phenomenon. Negative influence is not the overwhelming trend. So let's all just build patiently and slowly back as to the goal that we have of resuming as normal as possible ties, and resume the great story of the student-to-student exchanges and their role in U.S.-China relations. Thank you. Look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Rose, for your great words on and the prospects for the recovery of the people exchange between U.S. and China. I think it's a process, take the time, but we still need to call on the process is coming. Thank you. So as we are over time, we should maybe everyone just one or two sentences to finish and conclude our discussion and more points. Maybe we steal from Peggy.
Yes, thank you. I agree with all of the comments that have made so far. And the only thing that we didn't really have a time to talk much about was how to get more American students back into China. And of course, the first problem will be opening the border and starting to issue visas again. I think it's important to know that America issued over 130,000 visas to Chinese students in the past 2 years. And we really need to find a way to get more possibility for more Americans to study in China. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Da Xuanfeng. Can you open the microphone?
Yeah, I completely agree with Peggy. So far, we have concentrated only on Chinese students coming to the United States. We hardly talked about American students going to China. I don't know how many of you actually talk to any young students graduating from high school who cannot wait to apply to Tsinghua University. The number is almost zero. And I think that we need to change that mindset in the United States, because United States is not a closed system anymore. The world is changing very, very fast. In fact, Asian universities are rising so fast right now. I have actually started a dialogue, a platform called Dialogue on Asian Universities, which I'll send it to everyone. Asian universities are transforming, and it is in many ways standing shoulder to shoulder to the best in the United States. That's our competition in the US from now on. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for this session. I think it's been very enlightening for all of us. I think that one of the themes that many of us spoke about are the tensions between the U.S. and China, and I don't think many of us see those going away in the certainly in the short or perhaps even medium term. And so I think that the university relationships, the non-state relationships, become crucial to keep our societies underneath the governments connected and understanding and growing. And so students coming to, Chinese students coming to the US, even if the numbers have fallen off, incredibly important for us to continue. And like my colleagues have said, going the other way, while China isn't open today for many US students to be able to go, for us to think about how that can work also becomes important. So thank you.
Thank you, David. How about Governor Holden? It's your turn
Yes.
to conclude. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I very much appreciate the comments made by everybody this evening. I think one of the important things is we need to figure out how to connect every level of our society with a similar level in China, whether it be elementary schools, secondary schools, high schools, colleges, and open the door so that all of these different elements of our culture can have a better understanding of China, and the Chinese culture can have a better understanding of our organization, and build these relationships and look at it as a long-term program, not a quick fix or a solution immediate. And if we do that and open ourselves all the way around for that education to transpire, then I think we can be very successful. But it has to be a collaborative effort on the part of everybody to make this happen.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Kim?
Thank you so much. I think the one thing that I have been so optimistic about borders opening for a very long time, and it's always a little bit challenging to think and to plan for when they will be open, because the COVID seems to have also a different plan in mind. I am hopeful that we could get there soon, but I don't always know when soon is. I completely agree with the sentiment of involving Gen Z. And I think so much of our programming, we will focus on next generation leadership and looking for opportunities to build some of that connection of building together, learning together, and leading together for futures that hopefully will benefit a deeper and brighter relationship between the United States and China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. How about Dennis?
Okay, maybe I'll make two proposals. One is, I think it's time for us to develop a brand new set of collaborative agreements between the two countries, ones that were drafted in 1978, 79 for education and collaborative research have become obsolete. I think that it's basically time that we recognize the problems that have emerged, confront them head on, and begin to draft a new set of agreements for education and for science and technology that reflect the new base conditions, one of greater parity, greater symmetry, and greater equality in terms of the two countries' relationship. Unless we do that, we're always going to be caught with the legacy of the past, and we won't have any basis for breaking through for the next 40 years. And I'm looking for the next 40 years. The last 40 years were a pretty good ride until a few years ago. I'm hoping we can come out of the doldrums and find a new pathway. And the only way I believe we can do that is through a set of new agreements that involve not just government, but as everyone here said, all of the stakeholders from business, academia, etc., who have an interest in the bilateral relationship.
Thank you. Mrs. Rose? Your turn.
Sure. First, I'd like to say I think that's a great idea to take a new look at those exchanges that were, the agreements that were drafted 40 years ago. They've been wonderful and they've served great purpose, but the world is changing or has changed, and we need a new set that recognizes the new reality. My point was just going to be, I tend to be optimistic because of the young people I talk to. I know that in terms of getting more Americans to China, there's a great deal of pent-up demand right now from young students who wanted to go to China and haven't been able to for many years. So we've never been able to get huge numbers, but I think the numbers are going to rebound strongly back to at least where they were before. And I see a lot of enthusiasm from the Chinese students who are here now. So I think the young people will show us a way forward.
Thank you, all of you. I know right now in US it's very late, and thank you for your passion for our people-to-people exchange between our two countries. Yes, the people-to-people exchange play the significant role, the most important pillar of our relationship. I think this is a very important moment as well. China is about to reopen the door and welcome more people to visit China, and welcome all of the old friends for China to visit China again. But I think this is a good moment for our panelists to call on the people-to-people exchange, the engagement between the young people, between the media and the business guys, of course, including our tourists. Those groups of people are very, very important for our relationship, for long vision or short term, both. Thank you very much to participate in a great panel. I think it will be remarkable in history that at the very important moment, our distinguished panelists to call on that mobility, call on that movement. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.